As modest as Motorola's two latest smartphones may be, they're making a lot of waves. But how do the two compare? I'm Taylor Martin, this is Pocketnow, and this is the Motorola Moto G versus the Moto X. The Moto X and Moto G are both very telling of Motorola's new direction, a centralized focus on user experience over absurd and excessive specifications. Naturally, the two needed to be compared. We've already discovered what a pleasure to use the Moto X is, but with the Moto G out there for a mind-blowing $200 or less, is the Moto X worth the extra cash? Let's find out. Before we do, we'd like to give a shout out to our friends over at Clove for supplying us with a Moto G for review. Be sure to check out their site if you'd like a Moto G of your own. When we first took the Moto G out of the box, we had to do a double take to make sure Clove sent us the right device. Visually, from the short distance, the Moto X and Moto G are easy to mistake for one another. They have the same general size and shape with very similar designs. Both have the rounded back, the same button, camera flash, and port placement, and the much-loved rear dimple your index finger can't help but gravitate towards. A few minutes with both, however, and the differences begin to pile up. Once in the hand, the additional heft of the Moto G is unmistakable. It's 1.2mm thicker and 13 grams heavier than the Moto X. You also begin to notice the small differences, such as the speaker grills. The Moto X's rear speaker, which rests to the right of the camera, is an array of finely machine-drilled holes. The Moto G's grill is also machine-drilled, but the individual holes are larger and they look cheaper. Further, on the front, the cameras are on opposing sides, and the Moto G's speaker grill is notably larger and more visible. On the inside, the differences are even more abundant. Moto X was never one of the most impressive smartphones on paper. Its 4.7-inch 720p AMOLED display bears a comparatively low density beside other manufacturers' flagships. The unique X8 mobile computing system, composed of a Snapdragon S4 Pro chip and two low-power cores for contextual computing, is far from the most powerful. And the rest of its specs are part of the same modest story. 2GB of RAM, 16 or 32GB of fixed storage, a 10-megapixel clear pixel camera, and a 2200 mAh battery. No matter how you look at it, the Moto G is a mid-range smartphone. It comes with a 4.5-inch 720p LCD panel, 8 or 16GB of fixed storage, 1GB of RAM, a 5-megapixel shooter, Snapdragon 400 chipset, and a 2070 mAh cell. There are quite a few important things missing from the Moto G's tool belt as well. NFC, Wi-Fi AC, and LTE are among the most notable. The displays are undeniably the biggest difference. The Moto X's 4.7-inch panel stretches from edge to edge, touching the trim on either side of the face. The Moto G's 4.5-inch display does not. There's roughly an 1/8-inch margin on either side of the display. Size is only half the story though. The Moto X uses an AMOLED panel with high saturation. The Moto G has an LCD display. The difference is immediately noticeable. Side by side, the LCD panel of the Moto G appears washed out, blacks are noticeably less inky, and whites are cooler, whereas the AMOLED panel errs on the warmer side. But the Moto G's color reproduction seems truer to life. Another minor difference, the rear cover of the Moto G is removable. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean the battery is removable, as noted by the notice, battery not user removable. The only reason to remove the back cover is to insert the micro SIM. The Moto X's nano SIM tray is found on the left edge. For $500, you're getting a higher quality product, customized to your liking with a better display, more solid in-hand feel, and a more unique user experience. For $200 or less, the quality of the Moto G is impeccable, and that price difference makes these two devices very difficult to compare directly. At the surface, the Moto X and Moto G look like they might run the exact same software, and coming from the same firm, you would imagine they would be. That's not the case. The Moto X is currently running KitKat or Android version 4.4. Our Moto G unit is running Android 4.3. The differences in those versions of software are mostly minimal, particularly to anyone considering a $200 phone to begin with. For the time being, the Moto G has a legacy dialer, not the newer dialer with business search integrated. It doesn't come with the print functionality built in, and it's missing the further enhancements for low-end smartphones introduced in KitKat. Frankly, those are the least concerning of the missing software features. The Moto G is missing all of the features which make the Moto X unique, such as trusted devices, active display, touchless control, and NFC unlock through skip. There's a reason all of these features are missing though. Skip requires NFC, something the Moto G does not have. Touchless control relies on Motorola's X8 mobile computing system, also something the Moto G does not have. Active display makes use of the AMOLED display on the Moto X for saving power. The Moto G has an LCD panel, and the pulsing display would burn a considerable amount of power. Other Motorola-specific software is included, however, such as Assist, Migrate, MotoCare, and Motorola Privacy. And outside those discrepancies, these two devices are running very near-stock versions of Android. The Moto X has more than one advantage in performance and speed. Its CPU clock speed is faster, 1.7 GHz compared to the Moto G's 1.2 GHz quad-core CPU. It also has double the RAM and a more powerful GPU. In average tasks, such as opening and switching apps, the Moto X is noticeably quicker and more smooth. The Moto G is rather easy to bog down, and the limitations of having only 1 GB of RAM begin to show after switching between just a few applications. All things considered, it still performs exceptionally well, and its gaming performance isn't bad either. We experienced some frame rate drops in some graphic-intensive games like Asphalt 8. But for all intents and purposes, the Moto G was not designed to be a gaming or high-performance machine. It's aimed at the bare minimum user, and for that, it's great. Fortunately, the difference in loudspeaker grill appearance and location has little to do with the quality. While the Moto X's speaker produces a little higher quality sound with more low end, the Moto G's is just as loud with more emphasis on mids and highs. At full volume, the Moto G does begin to distort some, but for all the listening you'll do for mobile, these two are very close in the sound department. We've only had the Moto G for one day now, so we're not ready to draw any conclusions on the stamina department just yet. The Moto X's 2200 mAh battery manages to last up to a full day of usage, though we often have to supplement the charge mid-afternoon. Through our testing today, the Moto G has actually drained comparably to the Moto X. To be fair, the camera on the Moto X was a pretty big disappointment. The hype surrounding the clear pixel technology was great, but the 10 megapixel Moto X camera was anything but. It produces lifeless, noisy, artifact-filled images, which offer dull colors, low contrast, and a serious lack of detail. As such, we weren't expecting much from the shooter on the Moto G, which has half the resolution. And it's a good thing. The Moto G camera is horrendous. In terrific lighting, the camera can take a decent image, but it suffers from all the same problems the Moto X does. Low light performance is pretty bad on the Moto X, and much, much worse on the Moto G. Frankly, if you care anything about image quality, your best bet is to look elsewhere. So what can we make of these two modest smartphones which are making serious waves? For starters, they're not for entirely different users like the different price points would suggest. They're for the everyman and woman, those who don't need anything excessive, massive, or incredibly powerful. Both the Moto X and Moto G are about user experience, and they're for those who just need something to get the job done reliably. The Moto G is simply for someone on a tighter budget, willing to make a few more sacrifices. The Moto X for $300 more is a markedly more well-rounded device with additional and very useful features and a more polished chassis, deserving of the extra cash. That's going to do it for this comparison. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to let us know by clicking the thumbs up button below and subscribing to the channel. Leave a comment if you have any questions or suggestions, and be sure to follow us in all the usual places, Twitter, Facebook, and Google+, at Pocketnow. I'm Taylor Martin. You can find me on Twitter at CasperTech, and I will see you next time.